Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to Talkin' Ball Live here on July 15th, Monday evening. We are getting ready for NFL training camp. Some teams' camps open this week. The Giants open the following week. An exciting time. Every team's record is 0-0, no losses, only hope springs eternal. Even a team like the Giants, whose projections in Las Vegas over under at 6.5 wins, even in those scenarios, those teams still have elements of the unknown, turnover on staffs, turnover on the roster, rookie draft picks, players added in free agency, things that can make this team different, things that hopefully can improve everybody's team around the NFL. And here in New York, here in New Jersey, Giants fans hoping for a lot more progress in year 3 of the Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll regime. And I wanted to start off by talking about one of those rookies, talking about none other than Malik Nabers, potentially new face of the franchise, potentially most exciting player on this team this season. If we saw anything in the spring that made our eyebrows raise, it was Malik Nabers out at practice on one particular day, dominating to the point that it made you think about the last time Odell Beckham Jr. was a Giant, the type of player who can change a game, who changes the field, who forces defense to pay attention to him, and really automatic double teams could be coming his way. I was going to say number 9's way, but let's see what he's wearing come the fall, come week 1. But I wanted to address how Malik Nabers' trip to an adult entertainment site, strip club in Houston, that popping out on Instagram, nothing, no moral judgment here, nothing inherently wrong with a young man going out at night with his friends, throwing money around onto the stage there, though. And that video, that clip that we saw on social media, it's just the type of thing that the Giants, when they draft a player like Nabers, who came with a lot of questions off the field about, okay, how is he going to handle this type of market? We even saw during HBO's Hard Knocks the questions from the Giants, both the scouting staff and the coaches directly at Nabers, about how he handles even starting a game, not seeing enough of the ball. This is a player who, if you just look at his talent and his production on the field, you know that this could be something exciting and something special. I think if there's any concern, anything we're watching to see whether it's not going to work out and help Daniel Jones and help Brian Daboll in this offense, it's what potentially could happen off the field, or how the player, and a very young man still, now inheriting a huge platform, is going to react when things aren't going his way necessarily. And again, no direct judgment of his actions, but I think we can safely say that the Giants, who had full editorial control of HBO's Hard Knocks, if this clip of Malik Nabers in the strip club had appeared in one of HBO's rough cuts and they showed John Mara and Joe Schoen and said, do you want us to leave this in? I think they would say, no, I think we should select this, pull it out, take it out. This is not going to be shown to America. This is not what we want people talking about when it comes to our first round pick and our team. And it's just so fascinating to me also that in the modern media day and age, you have a team of professionals at HBO and Hard Knocks and, Max and the Giants all putting together for a full spring, getting all this footage of this behind the scenes information on the team. And certainly a lot of it that's interesting that we'll talk about here on this Talkin' Ball Live podcast. But it's so interesting that they gather all that and they show it to us on time delay, and nothing like that, even if it's interesting content, can compete with live current video of a top 10 pick out of the strip club making it rain, right? So the discourse is not going to center on the Hard Knocks as much as it is on Nabers' actions. Now, again, he's still young. It's still early. He's going to have a chance to prove himself, and what he does on the field matters most. But I think the Giants could safely say that they would prefer not to see content like that pop up again. Content that I'm excited to announce is a new sponsor for the podcast, Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink, right here. Really grateful to Rich and the Boom Chaga team for believing in Talkin' Ball Live and for jumping on board with the Talkin' Ball with Pat Leonard podcast. Talkin' Ball with Pat Leonard is brought to you by the Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink, a natural extract loaded with anti-inflammatory, immune-boosting antioxidants, and heart-healthy compounds. You can easily pour this natural liquid supplement into any of your favorite drinks, I put mine in my coffee every morning, and I immediately feel the difference. I personally have felt a post-workout like energy boost with Boom. And chaga also has the ability to lower cholesterol, reduce inflammation, and improve heart and immune health with its beta glucans and antioxidants. Go to boomchaga.com today to place your first order. And if you use the discount code TalkinBall25 or you access it through the QR code on your screen, you'll get 25% off your first subscribe and save order. Right now, that means a month's supply costs you only $30. It's going to come exactly as you see it here in the bag behind me. Start feeling the difference today at boomchaga.com. And as you see on our overlay here on the Talkin' Ball Live Q&A chat here, where I'm going to answer all of your fan questions, NFL, Giants, whatever. You can see in the top right, there's the QR code, and there's the Talkin' Ball 25 code in case you are interested. Can't recommend it enough. Also brought to you by BetOnline, your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right up to all the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here. And also brought to you by Estate 98 Coffee and Esencia de Cafe from El Salvador. Dates back to 1798. Estate 98 Coffee, go get it. Buy it through the TikTok shop. That's a really easy, convenient way to get your coffee and get it rolling. All right, let's see who's going to kick us off here in the chat. Great to see all of you back here, even during a mid-month of July when I know some of you are on vacation and football is only just starting to gear up. It's almost there, not quite. Ken in Wisconsin kicks us off and says, "Hi, Pat. Been watching Hard Knocks. What jumps out to me is how Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator, seems non-existent. I mean, it is glaring to me." Ken, I think that's an astute observation by you. Definitely Mike Kafka, no, not a player at all in the show. I think it appears that during the Giants, even their inner workings during their offseason, similar to when all of the coaching dysfunction was being unpacked in January and February, it appears Mike Kafka is keeping his head down, literally. And there is reason that he would want to do that personally. There is also things out of his control that is creating that dynamic, namely, as it appears that Brian Daboll is now the primary play caller, the full-time play caller. We know he's called plays, obviously, last year at times. But now that Daboll's the primary play caller, the Giants prevented Mike Kafka from making a lateral move to Seattle, and it appears that he has had the play calling duties stripped away from him. So really, Ken, I think what you're pointing to is that from what we have seen in Hard Knocks, it's reinforcement of the fact that he's basically on the sidelines despite the promotion that he was given in title to essentially airbrush over the reality of what happened this past offseason. 10 departures from the Giants staff, 10 key departures, including the strength and conditioning and training rooms. And so, you have coaches, few of them fired, but many of them left of their own accord. And so I think what you're pointing to is that really this is a Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll show. And I don't just mean Hard Knocks HBO on the Giants. I mean the Giants program with them running it. It's really a Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll operation. And so they deserve all the credit if it goes good and when it goes good. And they've gotten it certainly at times. And they take the blame when it goes wrong. And that's really where it starts and finishes. Certainly points to an interesting dynamic, though, that the only holdover of their three coordinators, with Martindale and McGahee both either resigning or getting fired, Kafka is the only holdover of the three coordinators. And as you said, appears to be, at least based on Hard Knocks HBO, a bit player in those conversations. We'll see if he gets featured a little bit more as the show goes on. G-Men says, "Pat, welcome back, my friend. Out of 10, what would you rate the Giants Hard Knocks series so far? Things you are surprised they have shown us." G-Man, I think the Saquon content is, 10 out of 10 as far as being revealing about, Saquon side, Joe Schoen side, John Mara, Tim McDonnell, and Chris Rossetti, and the voices in the room kind of trying to guide it in a different direction than it ended up going. I think certainly it does appear that the Giants have allowed a lot in, right? They appear to be comfortable with letting a lot of this inside content that they could have said, let's exclude this, let's take this out. They've left it in, so definitely a credit to them being transparent in that regard with some of what we've seen, what's gotten to the public, right? Because there are plenty of cases in the past that teams have not allowed, such private conversations to get through and to reach the mainstream. So I think the Saquon content, though, is the clear front runner as far as the best storyline and the most intriguing, but also really the only one that has me on the edge of my seat. I think obviously it was very interesting to be in the quarterback interview rooms and hear some of that. But by and large, I think a lot of the other content outside of the Saquon Barkley conversations has not brought a ton of new information. Maybe it has brought confirmations of what I knew or what we knew or have reported or discussed previously. There were times I felt like the second episode was really slow. The first episode I felt was more interesting, kicking it off, getting it going. There were certainly interesting moments in the second one, again, going back to, especially once you came back to this Joe Schoen, Saquon Barkley direct phone call. But I was more interested in the first episode than the second. I do believe that even though the first episode at times looked like something that was always just going to basically favor Joe Schoen and paint him and the Giants in a certain light at the start, by the end of it and after a couple episodes here, I feel like people in the league feel like the warts of the Giants operation and the processes under Shane's regime that haven't gone ideally the way they should and the way that the conversations are happening doesn't all reflect very well on the Giants operation right now. There are, of course, like in my mind, Chris Rossetti has stood out as a really impressive voice in the room. And also, G-Men, I would like to say this. This is something I was talking to somebody about today before coming on the show. There are absolutely times, and I have definitely written about it and been, one of the people consistently pointing it out if I saw it, that, the meddling of ownership is holding the team back, right? And that could be said about other franchises too, that happens in other places. And there are, of course, times, especially when you talk about general manager and head coach hires, and then major roster decisions, Eli Manning, et cetera, that go back to, hey, just let the GM or let the coach do their jobs, right? But I was personally not taken aback, but impressed with that scene where Tim McDonnell says to Joe Schoen that, if we get rid of Saquon, if he's not back, what does our offense look like? What is our offensive identity? I actually have the quote right here. He says to Joe Schoen, if we lose Saquon, right, what's our identity going to be on offense now? And what's our plan? What's the next step of that? I guess is what I'm thinking. We're losing a large part of our offense, our explosiveness, our touchdowns, our quarterback, if it's Daniel, depends on the running game. Now, of course, very interesting that Tim cited that Daniel Jones, if he's their quarterback, if there was a word there, if early in the spring, and explaining from the ownership side, right? Because Tim McDonnell was in the front office, but is also part of the Mara family. I felt like that was a more, and we know that Tim McDonnell has a lot of experience in personnel, but that was, to me, an important scene and comment and quote coming from Tim in that conversation, because I think a lot of people have a view, and for good reason, of like that the Mara GM dynamic is more like when Shane talks to John Mara and when Mara articulates that he would rather see Saquon remain a Giant if in a perfect world. And then he makes that comment off the cuff, well, if we lose Saquon, we're going to have to draft another running back high, right? Those kind of comments make you kind of pull back the reins and say, whoa, 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 whoa. let's even though the owner has good intentions, that's not where we're going with this, right? And so there's important context. Basically, every conversation is different. And I still, after 2 episodes, feel like McDonnell telling Joe Schoen, we're losing our touchdowns. What are we going to be? And, you could have your whatever feelings you do about Saquon and about the Giants and about the running backs and all that, like Shane does. But I thought it was, here's the GM who clearly, even on a personal end, doesn't want this relationship with the running back to continue in New York. And here is Tim McDonnell, part of the ownership family and also part of the front office, sounding more like the general manager who is dispassionate, talking about the team's identity rather than the owner who's being led by his emotions. So that's been my primary takeaway, I think, and the scene that I consistently think of. G-Men says, for tomorrow's episode, where do you think it will start? So he's referring to the 3rd episode, which drops on July 16th, Tuesday. And depending on the demand for it here on the Talkin' Ball Live community and in Giants land, I would consider, and I know our good friend Joe suggested to me on Twitter that that we would do another Talkin' Ball Live immediately following the 3rd episode at 10 p.m. on Tuesday to react to that. So you guys let me know as we sit here and talk if that's something you'd be interested in, because I know I'm going to take another quick break the end of this week, with Thursday to Sunday, just take one last breath of, the beach air before we get into training camp. And so we're not going to be doing Thursday night this week, but then after that, we'll be on our regular Monday, Thursday program. So I was considering doing either Tuesday or Wednesday this week. So if you guys want to do a post immediate Hard Knocks episode live chat here on Talkin' Ball Live on Tuesday, let me know. So G-Men says, for that episode, where do you think it will start? Episode 2 ended on Saquon Barkley's talk with Joe Schoen and the agent Ed Berry on March 5th. On March 8th, Shane and Daboll had exploratory talks with Russell Wilson. G-Man, your head and my mind are in exactly the same place on what I expect and I think what you expect from the 3rd episode. So we're now used to some transparency here in this series. And if the Giants really are going to truly be transparent about how aggressively they pursued the quarterback position, then we need to see Russell Wilson on this show. And we need to see more than just him walking into the building in sunglasses and that's it. Like, we need to see some conversation and explanation of what that was. And to be honest, I felt like they contextualized in the 2nd episode of Hard Knocks the pursuit of the number 3 pick with the Patriots. They contextualized that with all of their work on the quarterbacks. And so if they're going to continue to be genuine and the storyline is not going to take a turn into some propaganda about something else, then it should articulate their strong pursuit of this quarterback position, the player that even Joe Schoen was quoted in the 2nd episode saying that, if Daniel's not ready for week 1, I can't start 0-3, which of course does not bode well for Tommy DeVito, who was on the roster when Joe Schoen's making that comment about how if Daniel Jones can't play, we got to add somebody. So unfortunately for anybody who's hoping that Tommy is in, elite standing here on the quarterback depth chart, I think that spoke very loudly, that comment by the general manager. But yes, I agree with you. I want to see, we need to see Russell Wilson definitely from all the previews and the primers that we've seen from HBO and Max and the Hard Knocks commercials. Brian Burns and that pursuit and the eventual trade and the conversations around that, I think is probably going to end up taking a larger part up of this 3rd episode and maybe 3rd and 4th than, and kind of trump the quarterback. So I think it's probably, in my mind, going to be more continue the Saquon conversation and behind the scenes looks and Brian Burns. But the quarterback should be right there too. Be interesting to see which personality is featured in this one as well, because obviously we saw a little bit of Shane Bowen in the first one. We've seen a little bit of Brian Daboll. We've seen a lot of Joe Shane. We saw a good amount of the scouts in the second episode. So I'll be curious to see who stands out, once we get to the third episode, as well as kind of like a feature personality. Let's see. Hunter says, what's good, Pat? Hope all is well. Great to see you, Hunter. Glad to be back. To be honest, as much as I enjoy that time away, and I really try to take that deep breath during the short summer that we have covering the NFL and being around football, to me, it's also, this is what I love. Like, I love doing this. I love talking football. I love talking ball. I love interacting with you guys. I love bringing information from inside the league and the Giants building to you, articulating my opinions, bouncing off ideas. And I love what we've built here and are continue to building and are continuing to build. So I guess as much as I've enjoyed some time away, I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad to have you back here, Hunter, and everybody who has checked in here tonight. Remember, if you have a comment or question that you want answered first, you can purchase a super chat or super sticker, and your comment or question or opinion will rise to the top of the queue. I will answer it immediately or address it immediately. And that's a great way to support the channel. If you don't want to purchase a super chat or a super sticker, don't worry about it. Hit those thumbs up, though. Hit the like button as you are here live watching the show, because that really tells the YouTube algorithm we're here, we're talking Giants, we're talking ball, we're talking NFL, and it helps push this show and attract more listeners, more viewers who otherwise maybe just don't know what we're doing here yet, but they're going to know by the time we get to week 1 of the 2024 NFL season what they've been missing and what they can contribute to here. I love doing this. For those of you who are new, I am the NFL columnist and Giants beat writer for the New York Daily News. So I cover the Giants daily, but also the whole league. I've been covering the Giants since 2016. That was Ben McAdoo's first year, the playoff year, the boat trip year, Odell Beckham Jr., Eli Manning, and been our NFL columnist for about 4 years now, I think it is, maybe 5, lost count here, but definitely honored to be entering. What do we have? 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Season 9. Wow. Season 9. I had to do that on my hands. That's me in math for you. But man, yeah, I'll tell you what, there are days where it feels like I started yesterday, and there are days where it feels like I've almost reached a decade covering the NFL. So honored to be here. Lucky to do it for a living. And let's keep it rolling. Joel says, Pat, you're now more than ever famous getting some airtime on Hard Knocks. Real question for you. Shane keeps getting ripped by a whole bunch of ex-NFL brass. Should it be a concern on your end? So, Joel, first of all, I thought it was pretty funny, actually, when everybody found out that the Giants were going to be on Hard Knocks, and then it got closer to actually airing. I started to get a lot of questions from people who wanted to know, was I going to be featured? Was I going to make even more than a cameo? Like, because on shows like this, sometimes they ask you as a person who covers a team or is around the team to do a sit down, to talk about what it's like covering the team, maybe to provide a media or outside perspective on the operation. And so it was funny. I told all my friends and anybody who wanted to know that, no, I did not expect the Giants to choose, if they had to choose 1 or 2 reporters out there, I did not expect them to pick me to be the person that they thrust into the spotlight in front of the cameras, even though I think I would do a bang up job of representing the media corps and telling an honest and fair picture of it. But certainly there are people who write things that the team would prefer is out there. And there are people who write things that the team tries to prevent from getting out there. And so that's just the way it goes. But they did allow me, they graced me with my presence on the first episode, walking into the locker room with my black bubble vest on and my jeans, standing on the fringe of Daniel Jones's interview on breakup day, I believe it was, and kind of typing down what he was saying, listening to him, but also keeping an eye on the rest of the locker room and eyeing some other, players and developments in the locker room that I wanted to follow, people I wanted to talk to, checking things off my list, multitasking, doing 50 things at once. That's a very typical day. So that was the quick Pat Leonard shot. We'll see if I make it back on camera. I do believe that I know the only other time that I know that I was either on camera or around the cameras was, there was the rookie mini camp when they were filming a practice that we were at. But there was also during the draft, after the players get drafted, we do, calls with them, whether they're at home or at a draft party or at the draft. We are back in East Rutherford with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll and the Giants brass, interviewing them in the auditorium. And then we come back in and we do a conference call with the players. And so at least one, maybe two of the conference calls that we did in the media room, all the cameras came in and videoed what we were doing. So might see a quick cameo on that as well, but that's not even what you asked about. So I'm off on a tangent. So Joel said, Shane keeps getting ripped by a whole bunch of ex-NFL brass. Should it be a concern on your end? Well, Joel, I think on our end, I think you mean for the Giants. So the bottom line is there are things that Shane has done and the way he has carried himself at times in some of these scenes that have just raised people's eyebrows and made people wonder exactly what's going on here. Now, here's what I think. There are times when Joe Schoen is dealing with the media publicly or defending himself publicly, right? Where he can come off as a bit abrasive. Maybe someone who's defensive might, have his ear to the ground a little too much. And listen, there are a lot of people in these leadership positions who, whether they're reading Twitter or whether they're having too many headlines sent to them every day, or whether their family's telling them, whatever it is, there's a lot of people in the public eye who struggle with that amount of constant criticism, seeing their names written day in and day out. I've always talked about it here on the Talkin' Ball Live pod about how it's gotten to me at times, seeing, if you start reading the comments and you see just how many people, even if you could have 30 people saying that they love the work you're doing, but you might have two people who are sitting there calling you a no talent clown. And so, you tend to remember those two more than the 30, and you try your hardest to, recenter yourself and have perspective. But going back to Joe Schoen, I think, I'm even a little surprised at behind the scenes that at times he tends to have that same abrasive tone, like in these meetings with his staff, when he's talking to ownership. Even the way he mocked the idea that he would be, he would be criticized if he lowballed Saquon in an offer and kind of like made a face and rolled his eyes. It's just, even the way that he said it took 10 years off his life and the personal nature of it to him. There are dynamics at play and politics at play in these positions and in these organizations. And I think that knowing the way that Shane operates, I expected him, despite that abrasive nature and the fact that he is still pretty much learning on the job as new to this position, right? A first-time GM in 2022 coming from Buffalo. I think I just expected his internal personality and those conversations with ownership to be a little bit more, not calculated is the wrong word, but careful, I guess. But certainly he comes off as someone who operates with a supreme confidence that I think at times can come across as, whether it's arrogance or just the fact that he knows and you don't, or it could just be, when you're in charge, you have a conversation and you listen to all these voices, but in the end, you're the decision maker and you're the one who has that pressure and that weight on your shoulders. I think all of that just goes in the pot. And what you see, to me, is a reminder to people that even though this team got to the playoffs in the first year, They are very much a fledgling organization with a first-time GM and coach still learning on the job. And so, yes, it's absolutely concerning. And it's confirmation of some things we knew, but also to me, I guess I wonder as I'm watching some of those scenes, how it's going to impact Joe Schoen if those decisions backfire. Like, very much, I am keyed in on listening to Chris Rossetti and Tim McDonnell and John Mara, especially the way that Rossetti and McDonnell framed it on Saquon. And, Rossetti had a really good feel for what the market was going to be, not just at running back, but for Saquon, and was vehement in his defense and his articulation of, the situation, the significance of the player, the way that he was going to be treated, the way that he felt he deserved to be treated, or how they should operate in that climate. And it just didn't seem like Joe Schoen he was listening to him, but he wasn't hearing him because he had already made up his mind. Right. And so in this is a long-winded way of me saying, it feels to me like when I watch the way that he's behaving and answering and responding in those moments, he's really putting his neck on the line in not taking those pieces of advice, in not maybe reaching a different conclusion than he intended to at the beginning because the information is telling him otherwise, right? Just does not come across like someone who is in those moments. It's more like he's doing what he wants to do rather than leading a group and generating a consensus from that conversation, if that makes sense. Jacob, my man. Jacob says, smash that like and sub button for Pat on your way in. I appreciate you, Jacob. Hunter says, I've been playing NCAA football for the past 4 hours. Definitely helps the fix for football in July. Yeah, how's the game? I haven't played it yet, but I know today was like Christmas morning for a lot of people. Undefined, what's going on? Undefined, I'll tell you what. I did not intend to even take as long of a break as I did, like maybe 3 weeks or so. Just got to the point where I really had a lot of ideas I wanted to get involved in executing for the podcast to make it better for the season. And the Daily News was kind enough to give me some time, just to take a breath. And so while I've been writing about Hard Knocks, I've really kind of taken a step back to work on the podcast, work on the show, work on the YouTube channel, have a lot more in store. As you see, Boom Chaga on board with the Talkin' Ball Pat Leonard podcast and Talkin' Ball Live. Couldn't be more excited about that as a new sponsor. You can see the code and the QR code and the Talkin' Ball 25 code up here on the screen. Go take a look, boomchaga.com, read about it. I think you'll love it. But Undefined, I'm glad to be back. Glad to be back. Glad to be talking. Glad to be chatting. Antonio, what's going on, Pat? It's been a minute. Hope you've had a good summer so far. Have had a great summer, Antonio, but I'm excited for the season. Noel, hey, what's up? He says, hey, Pat, thanks for being available. Do you know the status of Evan Neal? He says that the plan is to be ready for training camp, but will he really be ready? As far as I know, that's still the plan. Should have more information on that in the coming days. But that's my understanding is the plan is for Evan Neal to be on the field, ready to go, going at his pace, going at the pace that the surgeons and the doctors have recommended to him, and taking care of his body and ensuring that he gets to the season, in the shape and in the health that he needs to be. But this is a fact too, Noel, is that Carmen Brasillo wants his offensive line group to play together and to play together pretty early and to gel. And in the spring, it would have been nice for the full five to be on the field. But Brasillo said, listen, if we get into training camp, we're still figuring this out in the first week, in the first few days, and we're tinkering with some things. Okay, maybe. But, you look at those joint practices coming up a couple weeks or a few weeks into camp against the Detroit Lions. Like, the Giants need to be set before that. They need to be set way before that. They need to be set by week 2, if not walking right in to training camp. And I think they are going to be set walking in right into training camp. We could debate on whether or not it's the right thing to, play Jermaine Illuminor at left guard. and to give Neal that starting spot, obviously, at least to start out with, and to try out to protect himself and to protect that position. But I think that you should expect the Giants to get their offensive line group together early, if not on day one, and to try to ride it out right from the get-go, because, the defense obviously has a new coordinator and a new system. So it's not the same thing. They're still running Brian Daboll's offense with Daboll calling the plays. But every position group, the offensive line, especially coming off of last season and everything that went wrong, like just as much, they need that to not only have continuity, but to hit the ground running immediately. Like, we can't talk about this enough. Week one, it has to be all systems go for this team. They can't ease their way into this season. And so Evan Neal being on the field has to be a part of that. Do you think they get into all the free agent signings in the next episode of Hard Knocks? I think you'll definitely see like the Singletary decision, I would think, especially because, on the one hand, you have Joe Schoen saying, look at all this value there would be in the second wave of running backs and free agency. And then we all know that they signed Devin Singletary, like the equivalent of like 5 seconds into the start of free agency, right? So yeah, I think you'll see it. But like we said earlier too, the Russell Wilson, Drew Lock, like those are the primary ones you want to see. Justin, what's going on? He says, hey, Pat, thanks for all your hard work covering the Giants. What are you hearing about new defensive coordinator Shane Bowen and his impact on the defense? Justin, similar to what we came out of the spring knowing, which was that, he didn't want to hear anymore and doesn't want to hear anymore about the adjustments from last system to this system. He wants people thinking in his system, thinking his defense. Again, just like we said about the offensive line, the Giants defense, they get into the camp here. Yes, there are going to be position battles. There's going to be a lot of, ups and downs and guys winning spots, losing spots, whatever it is, maybe some signings coming in for reinforcements. But for Bowen and for this unit, they need to get as close as they can, as early as they can, to having the product on the field that we're going to see in week one. And what I mean by that is obviously they're going to continue to improve as they go. They're going to build, they're going to start installing new things depending on their, who they're facing week in and week out. They're going to add more to guys' plates as they can show that they can handle it, right? But they need to be in camp the type of defense that instills confidence that this team can do it. They need to be the type of defense that is not an easy defense to play against. Like, say what you want if you have criticisms of the Wink Martindale scheme. And of course, it wasn't perfect, right? They didn't stop the run. The Giants very rarely stop the run. But the one thing, even if you're somebody who sides with Brian Daboll in that situation somehow, you still have to acknowledge that Martindale's defense was difficult to play against, both for the Giants offense in camp practices and in opponents' practices, in joint practices, and in real games, right? It's similar to the Belichick idea of tailoring the game plan to the opponent. Martindale, very good, not only at pressures, but also confusing quarterbacks, catching offensive play callers off guard, tailoring a game plan specific to that team that you're playing against, so that what they thought they were going to see and what they prepared for is not what they're facing on Sunday. And it takes them up until the early third quarter to even adjust, right? Not to mention tied for the league lead in turnovers forced last year in takeaways. I believe it was 31. In Bowen's system, Shane Bowen's system needs to be the kind of team that they need to have mastered the way that they play, the way that they attack, the way that they drop in zone, their responsibilities in those zones. Guys like Deonte Banks, it needs to be airtight, their understanding of how to react, their instincts on how to move in those spaces and how to jump to the ball and how to anticipate reads. Because what we've heard from players, Justin, is that this is a simpler system to understand, right? But a lot of times, simpler systems to understand for the players playing it, that also means it's easier to anticipate how the system is attacking you offensively, right? It's going to rely, you heard Shane Bowen say it himself in that Hard Knocks, they're going to rely on 4 elite pass rushers up front. Now, listen, we all would love to have 4 elite pass rushers up front. That would be a nice defensive recipe, right? But, similar idea to the way like Robert Saleh and the Jets attack, where nobody's surprised by how they line up every down, right? But if you can't handle their pass rush, there's just not much you can do, right? And they end up being one of the top defenses in football. So it can work, right? But on Bowen's end, I think I liked hearing from Bowen at the end of the spring that he didn't, he was tired of guys not jumping up and grabbing spots, not wrestling, let's say a starting corner job or whatever it is, or safety. He needs players to step up and not just become leaders and take ownership, but just prove that they have a solid foundation of understanding of what's expected of them and that they can make plays within the system. Because just like we said about the offensive line, you don't want to go into week 1 feeling your way around it. Like it's unavoidable to still be doing that because it's a first year system at some level, but let's just put our cards on the table here. We've talked about the stakes of week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings, right? It's a beatable team, a team without a clear, without a quarterback that scares you at the moment, right? Sam Darnold or rookie JJ McCarthy, even if you like him as a player, he would still be a rookie playing his first NFL game, right? If he were the starter. And so that's a game where the Giants not only need to win that to get off on the right foot and to have a good season based on their schedule, but to win that game, their best path to winning that game is their pass rush getting after the Vikings quarterback. Like that's the path to winning that game. That's what opens the door to starting 1-0, to winning that home game, and to hopefully set a more optimistic tone than we sit here in mid-July feeling about this program and about this team. So for Shane Bowen, what I understand about this defense and the way they're operating, the way they're approaching the season, this is about being ready in week 1, not gradually improving into week 1 and beyond, which is something that is ideally going to happen. But they know this is for Brian Daboll's sake. This is for Joe Schoen's sake. This is for this program's sake. They need to be on their P's and Q's and on their A game in a brand new system, unleashing Brian Burns, unleashing Dexter Lawrence, freeing up Kayvon Thibodeau for more one-on-ones, Deonte Banks playing like a number 1 corner against an offense that features Justin Jefferson, right? Like this is all systems go, and it has to be come week 1 in September. And that's where Shane Bowen stands. But yeah, going back to the Shane point too, I just remembered I didn't quite finish that point about Joe Schoen, which was, the Saquon Barkley decision, watching Hard Knocks, it really does look like the kind of decision that could make or break Joe Schoen's tenure here, especially when he's sitting there listening to Chris Rossetti's and the Tim McDonnells of the front office and of the world, and is still pursuing the avenue and the direction he ended up doing. It really casts in a stark light how much Shane has riding on that call, right? Letting go his best offensive player, in his own words, the face of his franchise. And how many GMs said out loud, this guy's the best offensive player on our team last year, and then either let him go or got rid of that player. Like this has got to be the only one. Joey B says, I've genuinely missed you all. Joey B, you too. Welcome back. Antonio says, Pat, I wanted to ask, with Giants talking about being interested in Christian Wilkins on Hard Knocks, would you rather have had signed Christian Wilkins as a free agent plus keeping the 2nd and 5th, or Burns? Antonio, that's a really good question. Knowing that he was as significant of an option, and watching it, that's definitely a new one. Like as far as like the level of conversations about Wilkins on the Giants end approaching free agency. I think that, well, first I'm curious about how Dexter Lawrence will feel, come week 5 or 6, if the Giants are really struggling and he feels like, Wilkins could have helped them on the inside, because frankly, we're still waiting for someone to emerge alongside Dexter Lawrence on the interior. They traded Leonard Williams, and it wasn't perfect when Leonard Williams was here in the interior either with defense, as far as the run game, especially. But, you know, the Giants could be the kind of team that, despite adding a key player like Burns who can rush the passer, if the Giants are continuing to be a team that doesn't score a lot of points and they're trailing, right, they're going to be facing a lot of offenses that are running the ball. And they're going to need some big, effective, consistent bodies on the interior of that defensive line. Dexter Lawrence can do a lot, but he can't do it all himself. And so I do wonder whether Wilkins would have been the right move there or not. He was expensive going to the Raiders, but as we know, Brian Burns was as expensive as it gets, both with that contract and trading the draft picks as well. So Antonio, I would say that, I'll be interested to see where it goes as we see these episodes continue. My guess is that the price of the Burns trade, as far as the picks, coming down from the initial conversation, involving 2 1s and a 1+, the fact that it ended up being that high 2, my guess is what started to, lead the Giants in the direction of picking Burns there in that conversation. But I am skeptical of their lack of depth and talent behind Lawrence on the interior. I think really, Antonio, it comes down to as well the evaluation of Kayvon Thibodeau, because if the Giants felt like Kayvon Thibodeau was an elite pass rusher, they wouldn't have felt the need to spend for a Brian Burns over a Christian Wilkins in that spot. I wouldn't think, at least to that level. Like, you're always trying to add outside pass rushers, but that is definitely a move that the Giants and that a team makes when they feel like we desperately need a number 1 outside edge rusher because we don't have one. So I think that's what it came down to. Welvin says, do you think our D-line is being overhyped? We have 2 similar speed edge rushers and 1 good defensive tackle. I think our run defense might be weak and edges will get washed most of the time. Welvin, that's so funny. I did not even see your comment below Antonio's before I just gave that answer. It's like you and I are on the same wavelength. That is a great point. Overhyped, I don't know, because it's interesting. There could be reasons to say, well, it was overhyped. It was never going to work as well as everybody said, because they did have this personnel deficiency. They needed more help in the interior. Burns and Thibodeau both have had good production, but neither has ever been elite, right? So why did they expect either of them to be elite, right? We could be looking in hindsight at that. The other thing, though, Welvin, is that the way this team is constructed and the way Bowen's defense is built, this position group has to be their best group, in addition, obviously, to getting better quarterback play and scoring points on offense. But the way they are built, the position group, the defensive line across the board, including the edge rushers, has to be the Giants' bread and butter. So I think the hype, some of it is connected to the pedigree and their investment, obviously, in those 3 players, in Lawrence, Thibodeau, and Burns. And then another part of it, Welvin, in my opinion, is the understanding that if that doesn't go correctly for the Giants, the bottom falls out, because if they're not going to lead them, who will? And, it's the same way, like, let's just say an Eagles fan would say that they're counting on Jaylen Hurts and Saquon Barkley unlocking, more to that offense, right? Or the Dallas Cowboys feeling like Dak Prescott, getting it done in the playoffs is the next step. Are there reasons why those things wouldn't work? Yes. Right? Did the Eagles look like one of the worst teams in football down the stretch last year? Yes. Does Dak, often shine better in the regular season than in the playoffs? Yes. But those are parts of the recipe, the key parts of the recipe for those teams to succeed and take their next steps and be the programs that they believe they can be at the highest of their ceilings. And so that's what you have to count on. That's what you have to hype up. That's what you have to believe in. So that's how I view that. But yes, Welvin, I do think that while discussing how important that position group is and how it has potential to be special, I think that if you're the Giants, right, if you're an NFL team, and Welvin, what I love about that question is Like, you can be a loyal fan and a fan who really wants to see the team succeed. And also, with that loyalty, you are pointing out deficiencies that you want to see cleared up so that your hope and your belief and your excitement is validated and it comes to fruition, rather than in hindsight, you say, we were all blindly believing it was going to be one way, but all the signs were there that it was another, right? And so that's these teams' job. That's the Giants' job. That's the front office's job. That's Joe Schoen's job. Their job is to avoid the worst case scenarios and to plug those holes that you're talking about may exist. Rich says, welcome back, Pat. Rich, what's going on? Scooby, welcome to Talkin' Ball Live. Great to see you, Scoob. Looking forward to seeing you at training camp as well. Can't wait for those practices. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully the temperatures come down, Scooby. I mean, good Lord, what has this been? This has been insane, this weather. That's why I need one more kind of respite down the shore, with that sea breeze kind of cooling it down for me before we get into standing out there in the hot sun on those fields. But obviously, who's complaining? We're covering the Giants and watching football for a living. Antonio says, have the Giants talked to Adoree Jackson, his agent, at all this offseason, and is signing another veteran corner still on the table? Antonio, I definitely think that the Giants are a team that have their eyes open and need to have their eyes open at the corner position. That cornerback 2 position is one that, definitely jumps out to you. Nothing to my knowledge at the moment on Adoree Jackson. Continuing to dig on those fronts, though. We'll let you know if I hear anything. I do know, though, that when I would say this, like when Shane Bowen was saying, I want to see guys step up and grab these, positions and prove that they deserve, certain roles. Like, without a doubt, he wants to see corners step up, in the slot at CB2, even with Deonte Banks, just, continuing to grow and prove that he can be the number 1 in this system. It's interesting. The secondary it's a concerning group, right? Like, do they have the high-end players they need to succeed? There's more opportunity for players on this team in the secondary than there is anywhere, right? So Nick McLeod, Drew Phillips, Cordell Flott, right? Even Darnay Holmes coming back. Like, these guys are going to battle because the Giants need somebody to step up. And if somebody doesn't step up, I think their efforts at scouring the market will increase. Definitely continue to watch, though. Like, there are plenty of veteran players who prefer now to, if they know their market is there at some point, at some level, and they know that they can, let's say it's avoid the spring program and then join in training camp, or avoid parts of training camp, but they still know that that there's going to be, let's say, 3 or 4 teams that are desperate for a corner who are going to sign them. And these are players who already know they're not going to get top dollar elsewhere. That is a standard veteran move at this point in the NFL. So the Giants, I think, should be in that market, even for just depth purposes, come the waiver wire cut down day in late August, heading into week 1. They have, I believe at the moment, about $11.5 million in cap space, could create some more if they need to. So they have some money to play with. Also, though, you don't want to be right up against it all season either and having to make moves every week with practice squad guys like they did 2 years ago just to get by. But we all know from the Burns move and from other things they've done this year that they're certainly trying to be a team that wins this year, despite the fact that they're still building. So kind of caught in the middle, as they often are. Christian, what's going on? Says, Pat, always appreciate these streams and you answering all the questions in the chat. Speaking on the Barkley negotiations, do you think they will reveal what their offer is? Interesting question, Christian. Taking a sip of my Estate 98 real quick. All right. So, Saquon Barkley said he never received an offer this go around from the Giants, right? So we've seen a look at, Joe Schoen doing some math on the board, and looks like it could be the general manager and his, staff having conversations about should we match this deal, right? So did Barkley come back to them and they did match it, right? Maybe Barkley came back to them and, and maybe we find out, oh, Saquon came back to them. They talked about potentially matching it and then they said, we're not going to. And then that's the equivalent of no offer, right? I know, I don't think, when Saquon Barkley said they never made me an offer, I believed him. That was my understanding at this juncture. Like, in other words, the Giants and Joe Schoen felt like in the end that last year they had made several different offers. And so when they got to this juncture and they realized what his market was or was going to be, that they decided, yeah, we're not going there. That's what we said we weren't going to pay. We're definitely not going there. And then it ended up in them not making an offer at all. But we'll see where it goes because, like I said, you never know when they tease these things. Sometimes it looks like it could be new information or contrary to what you initially believed. And then it turns out that it actually wasn't, and they kind of took it out of context for promotional use. So I'm interested. I'm as interested as you are to see exactly the way that the Giants arrived finally at Joe Schoen announcing, yeah, we're not doing this, and really kind of John Mara's reaction to that, because it was certainly confirmation of what John Mara told us at the owners' meetings when we saw his reaction to hearing that he could lose, Saquon Barkley and lose him to the Eagles, right? Like, this is something that John Mara said very clearly many times at the NFL owners meetings in Orlando, that he even said, Joe Schoen knows, even though I have trust in him and I trust what he's doing and it's his show, he knows that I wasn't thrilled about him staying in the division and going to the Eagles, right? Hunter says Mara is the helicopter parent owner. John cares as much as anybody. And like I said, there were parts of what he brought to those conversations I felt like Joe Schoen needed to hear. And then also there's some things like him saying, well, now we have to draft a running back high, that obviously is not the way to go. Noel says, remember to hit the like button for Pat. Thank you for that reminder, Noel. Hunter says, I'm down. Even though I don't have HBO, I will join. Yeah, you know what? I jumped into HBO for the month. I love HBO and everything it has to offer, but you can't subscribe to every darn streaming service out there. But Daily News kind enough to support a 1 month sub, so that's where we're going with. Antonio says, will you be doing lives after some of the training camps to give us some takeaways from the practices? Antonio, yes, I'll be doing a mixture of content right after the practices. So there will be days that I do a, YouTube short where I do a, top 3 takeaways from practice, right? I may even make that a daily thing if it's something that I can do nice and quick just to get that information out there. There will be days that I go live just impromptu right from the Giants facility with you guys and report live from practice. And even maybe if I have injury information, if I have little nuggets from practice that I'm working on, that could be a good platform to get it right to you guys, the fans, and to make sure that we're communicating directly with you and that you're hearing it first. That's what I want this to be. I want this to be a hub for NFL and Giants news that that you can trust here on YouTube. And that you can rely on consistent and timely information and content. And not just that, but also our interaction means a lot to me, and this community means a lot to me. So my plan, Antonio, is continue with the Monday and Thursday 9 p.m. live chats. And then in addition, supplement that with post-practice updates. So there will be times where I will go live after practice. There will be times I post a YouTube short with either a highlight or a top 3 takeaways. And there could also be times where I share video on the channel of player or coach or executive interviews that we've done from camp. But certainly expect daily new content during training camp and I'll be out there with the Giants every day, and we'll keep you apprised on all the developments. And then what I'm really excited about is come the season, Talkin' Ball Live post-game after every Giants game, home and away, with me live from the press box coming out of the locker room. Can't wait. Also, of course, have a lot of guests on deck, special guests. We're going to start recording again tomorrow, July 16th, with some special guests. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler joining the program this week. Super Bowl champion and NFL analyst Willie Colon jumping in with me as well. A great friend and just an awesome, knowledgeable person and professional. Can't wait to talk to both of those guys. And Rich Salgado, Big Daddy, just a title heavyweight in the NFL and in the insurance and business world. He's going to be joining the program as well. As great storyteller. And we're going to hit the ground running here going into training camp. Players, executives, coaches, analysts, reporters, you name it, legends. We're going to have it here. Giants 100th season. A lot more content coming your way. And like I said, been spending my time lately, upgrading the pod, getting it going. And it starts with Boom Chaga. Talking Ball with Pat Leonard is brought to you by the Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink. You see it right here. And then up here, Boom Chaga, Talking Ball code, use the code Talking Ball 25, or you can hit that QR code right there. Brought to you by Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink, a natural extract loaded with anti-inflammatory, immune-boosting antioxidants and heart-healthy compounds. You can easily pour this natural liquid supplement into any of your favorite drinks. I put mine in my coffee every morning and immediately feel the difference. I personally have felt a post-workout-like energy boost with Boom. Chaga also has the ability to lower cholesterol, reduce inflammation, and improve immune and heart health with its beta-glucans and antioxidants. Go to boomchaga.com today to place your first order. And if you use the discount code TalkinBall25 or access it through the QR code on your screen, you'll get 25% off your first subscribe and save order. Right now, that means a month's supply costs you only $30. Start feeling the difference today at boomchaga.com. All right. Christian says, do you think if they kept Barkley, Shane thought they couldn't fully evaluate DJ? Like, Barkley is good enough to win games. They shouldn't if DJ is bad and keep them from drafting a replacement. No, Christian, I don't think that because, that's the interesting part is actually having a good running game, as Tim McDonnell pointed out, is something that helps a quarterback and can help you maybe see his best. So, no, I don't think like having Barkley would have concealed something that Jones could be, but wasn't able to show. I think if anything, what you've seen is that the Giants offense was one-dimensional if it had a single dimension at all, in recent years, and especially last season. I think it's really just, I've said this before, and forget that it's Saquon. Like, it could be anybody. I just wonder how bad of a miscalculation it is. And I know they went through a lot with Barkley on the business end the year before, and Shane clearly just wanted to get to the finish line here and move on. But is replacing Barkley with Nabers, even if Nabers is an electric player, doesn't it help you more to keep Barkley and add Nabers and then have two players in different areas of the offensive game plan who put defenses in conflict, right? Oh, we're just going to double Nabers all the time. But wait, how many guys do we need in the box? Because they're going to run it with Barkley. And they added some guys on the offensive line, right? And don't tell me you couldn't have done what they did on the offensive line and added Barkley. They didn't go out and spend at the top of the market on the O-line, right? They didn't do that. So I think if anything, the miscalculation was, not retaining their best offensive player holdover and then adding to it this explosive rookie in the passing game. No, I think Shane appeared to be using Jones's contract and the Giants' articulated plan with ownership and in the front office to once and for all evaluate Daniel Jones. He appeared to be using that as an explanation and a rationale to defend his point that investing in a running back was not sound because they wanted to see Daniel Jones, the passer. Daniel Jones, he didn't say this, but, it's almost like they're trying to show that Daniel Jones can be Josh Allen in Brian Daboll's offense, for lack of a better comparison, to justify the contract that they signed him to. But in my opinion, trying to force a Josh Allen-like performance and ability and system on Daniel Jones is not fair. He's not Josh Allen. There's good things about Daniel Jones. He's not Josh Allen. Let's see. JJan checks in with a super sticker. Thank you, JJan, so much. $2 into the chat. JJan always supporting us. Thank you so much. I will get to all of your questions and comments in the queue. So if I'm skipping over you, don't worry about it. I'll get there. But as I said before, super chats and super stickers. If you're waiting to have your comment or question answered or addressed and you want it at the top of the queue, you purchase a super sticker or a super chat and it goes right to the top and I address it next. It's up in the queue. I answer it immediately and we get right on there. And so Jan checks in. He says, Pat, how are we feeling about McFadden and okay? I think you mean Bobby Okereke. Bobby Okereke was excellent last year, durable, one of the Giants' best players. You know, interesting to hear Shane Bowen say that so much falls on the inside linebackers in this system. I think Micah McFadden can be a supporting player. I'm not sure whether he's going to be the type of linebacker that Bowen is articulating he needs alongside Okereke there, though, like to kind of dominate the inside of the field. Like if you're talking about the Niners having, you know, Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw, right? Like if you're saying that you need these linebackers, inside linebackers to be elite and be leaders, you know, you need an upgrade next to Okereke there. Micah obviously has shown some really good football. There were times last year where he was one of the only guys playing well, you know, in certain spots or playing at a different level and playing with the kind of hard-nosed mentality that you want to see from a Giant. That said, a lot of missed tackles, and so it needs to clean that up. But I like Micah. I think he's the kind of player that the Giants, mentality-wise, approach-wise, that, you know, it's good to have him on the team. He was battling an injury in the spring. You know, hopefully see him healthy, you know, come the summer. So that's another thing to watch too. We had a lot of guys kind of sidelined during the spring. Isaiah Simmons, another linebacker / safety, was injured and nailing it on the side. McFadden, Evan Neal. So, you know, that's something we're going to be looking at come the start of training camp. Let's see. JJan also checks in. Pat, any word on Jaylen Hyatt? How is he looking? JJan, word on Jaylen Hyatt, nothing new since the late spring, other than, you know, we know that Daniel Jones got together with the skill players in North Carolina, did some throwing sessions. We know Jaylen Hyatt's been adding a little bit of weight, a little bit of muscle, understanding that he's going to be able to need to prove that he is durable. And let's face it, like there is one thing he does best, and that is going deep and turning on the burners. We saw in spurts him going inside, making some plays inside as a rookie, but for him to be the player and to be more well-rounded, he's going to need to go inside more. He's going to need to run different types of routes, and he's going to have to take some of those hits. He does not have the type of frame, not only as a young player who's still developing, but also as a thin person. You know, if you look at him, you wonder whether he'll be able to take a beating for 17 weeks. And so I think that has clearly been Jaylen Hyatt's goal, is to improve as a player, to continue to grow physically. And I think I think the plan for him in that vein, like talking about how they're trying to focus and key in on that, like that's a sound plan and the right approach. So I think the question now is, you know, can he become that route runner, and can he take those hits, withstand those hits? And we know that Malik Nabers is going to create some opportunities for others like a Jaylen Hyatt. So he's going to need to take the top off the defense and be a big game, you know, game breaker. And late last season, he was on the field a lot, way more than you would think if you look at his lack of production down the stretch. So I think what you need to see is some production compensatory with his workload. Remember, too, Hyatt had a really exciting camp as a rookie with Tyrod Taylor running the show with the second team offense. That was kind of opening our eyes last year as far as like, wait a second, right? The Giants actually might have something here. And he did win the Blitnikoff Award. Obviously, it wasn't like a shock. He was a pretty good wide receiver. But as far as what am I hearing right now, just that he's approaching, he's got the right idea about what he needs to get better at. It's just about executing it. Let's see. We got Noel says, Pat, what are you hearing about the competition between Tyler Nubin and Dane Belton for the free safety spot? Been digging on that, Noel. It's been a little quiet lately. I think the Giants certainly are understand that investing in a player like Tyler Nubin at that spot means that you got to put a lot of effort and resources and attention into readying that player to be a contributor, right? And a starter. But Belton also has he's been here long enough and approached things the right way long enough to not only deserve the chance to compete, at least at the start of camp there, but also, the way to get the best out of Tyler Nubin would not be to hand him the job, right? And the NFL teams typically don't hand guys the job, especially if they're, rookies who aren't first round picks, who haven't done anything yet in the league, who haven't made a ton of plays in practice yet. Like, you're not just going to throw that guy on the field and say, well, we'll see what happens come the games. But I do think that meaningful competition there, hopefully, is going to force Nubin to play his best football and to show early in camp that he's the guy. That's a really good example. No, I'm glad you asked that about of another position. Like I mentioned, the secondary, it's not just the corners, it's the safeties where there's opportunities for guys, but also there's concern if people aren't stepping up and grabbing it and asserting themselves immediately as clear difference makers and guys who have to be the starter and they're the 1A player and forcing someone who may even be playing well to be the backup. I continue to believe that, in order for that investment in that pick to work for Nubin, he has to be a starting safety on this defense. I know he's a rookie. I know not every second round rookie ends up starting right away, but the bottom line is that's a premier pick now in the NFL. Guys at that position not only need to contribute, but where the Giants are as a program in that spot where they had options of selecting, let's say, a more clear version of a starting slot corner than they got in the third round in Drew Phillips, or they could have taken an offensive lineman, right? Something that I continue to just be astounded that they didn't invest in offensive line in the draft. And they take a safety in Nubin, which was a need-based and also, evaluation-based selection of a player to help them in a position where they lost one of their better players and a captain in Xavier McKinney. You don't make a selection like that and then fail to put that player on the field to address that spot, right? That's a major, major issue if Nubin doesn't become a primary factor and contributor right away, because that's what you drafted him to be there over other players who could have helped you in other areas. Brian says, we love it too, Pat. Great to see you, Brian. Thanks for being here. He says, we love this too, Pat. Keep bringing it. Thank you. Todd Banks says, definitely do a post Hard Knocks episode. Yeah, so maybe I'll go back to back Monday, Tuesday, instead of doing Monday, Wednesday, because we are here during a week where Giants camp hasn't kicked off yet. So that might be a fun way to get back into this, we're doing our Monday live chat, Talking Ball Live with Pat Leonard here. Welcome back, everybody, from a quick summer break. And then Hard Knocks episode 3, we'll plan on being back here at 10 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Tuesday, July 16th, to try to hit the ground running on unpacking everything we saw in that episode. Tim Houston says, damn, I just got here. How long before you post this on Spotify, Pat? I'd prefer to listen to this from the start. Context matters. Tim, no later than tomorrow morning. So maybe first thing in the morning tomorrow, I'll have this up on Spotify and Apple Podcast. You'll be able to listen to it there. Started out with a monologue about Malik Nabers and Hard Knocks and the strip club and the way that media works nowadays. And then, we talked a little bit about the roster early on, but you'll be able to hear the full conversation there. Also, as I noted, excited to have Boom Chaga on as a sponsor. Christopher says, Pat, great to see you back. Great to see you, Christopher, as well. C-Note says, my big takeaway is that this is no longer a family business. Not sure how it's going to shake out, but I have a lot less confidence than before Hard Knocks. Yeah, C-Note, I think that's, from my vantage point, let's just say this. People who don't pay close attention to the Giants or really even care very much about critiquing them one way or another and are just watching this in the league to just see what it looks like are coming away with a not so glowing review of how the Giants work. And so I think you hit it right on the head there. Less confidence than before Hard Knocks. The fact of the matter is there are parts of these conversations and decisions that just don't come across as either advanced or sound. And it's not an encouraging dialogue. And also knowing some of the, like hearing Joe Schoen say out loud on the phone to Saquon's agent that he has no idea what's going to happen with the running back market. I mean, even Brandon Brown caught me off guard when they showed in late February at the combine. He says to Joe Schoen that he doesn't know Malik Nabers at all, like as a person. So that's why he's looking forward to get his hands on him and figure him out. Maybe I'm crazy, but that seems really late for the assistant general manager of an NFL team to have no grasp on like one of the primary questions about a player in Nabers who not only was a top 10 talent this year, but that people were saying that last year, if he had come out of LSU, he would have been the number 1 overall pick in the draft. And you don't know much about him? I mean, again, maybe I'm being unfair or crazy, but I don't think I'm not the only one, to your point, who's watching some of these things and hearing some of those things. And sometimes you just see something or hear something. And even if at first you don't know why, it just, something's off, right? And that's how they've come across to people in some of those moments. Let's see. We love Camilla says, Pat, but the offense still was no good with Saquon on the roster. And Camilla, that is part of Joe Schoen's primary point there too, is like when Tim McDonnell says that about Saquon, he's coming back essentially with the idea like, yeah, but we are, he was our best offensive player, but our offense stunk. Right. But I would argue that, like Joe Schoen pointing out how bad the offensive line was in the Miami game, as if it wasn't his line that he built, right? Like that starting line in that game was a line that contained some of his starters and then some of his backups that he had put on the roster as backups, right? So, the quarterback, the way the offense operated, like whether it's Shane, whether it's Daboll, roster construction, play calling, game management, there are so many reasons why the offense didn't work well. And again, for me, forget about whether you love Saquon or don't think he's as good as he thinks or people think or whatever. To me, where's the projection about what the offense will look like with or without him? Like, that's why I keep coming back to the McDonnell comment is no matter what you think of Saquon, right? Whether you think he's an okay player or a good player or a great player, there had to be a serious consideration, more serious consideration, in my opinion, than we saw there maybe was on the GM's end there of, yes, okay, maybe this is the result you're looking at that could happen, but what does that mean? Like, how are we going to be, and how how are we going to do more than tread water on offense if we add a good player but get rid of one? Ryan, what's going on? Good to see you. Ryan checks in with a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Ryan. Really appreciate you. He says, Pat, welcome back. Just hopped on. Who do you forecast calling plays in July? Interested in the lock first team snaps this summer. Ryan, to me, it looks like Brian Daboll. It's been Brian Daboll through the spring. I was hearing things basically in the late winter, right? Like during the early off season, even prior to free agency, about like this was going to be a Brian Daboll play calling operation. And really, it was just something that he was going to keep under his hat as long as he could. To me at this point, if they try to make it look like something else at this point, it's just going to be, it'll be a way for them to try to manage the optics of it. But frankly, at this point, I've said this before, not only there's no point in trying to manage that anymore, but also, like I've said this many times, if I'm Brian Daboll, if my job's on the line this year, as I believe it is, you got to do whatever you think is your bread and butter that you do best, that is going to put your best foot forward to not just protect your job, but to actually run a capable offense. I mean, this is one of the worst offenses in football last year, and this coach was hired for his offensive capability and his offensive mind. So not only did he struggle managing his staff and managing games, but the offense stunk, right? So I don't blame Brian Daboll for taking over play calling. It's better than, taking it and giving it back and taking it and giving it back and yelling at coaches for making the wrong plays like he did last year. So I forecast it's Brian Daboll. It's Brian Daboll all the way. We haven't seen Mike Kafka doing much of anything when it comes to the offense's operation out on the field, like to our eyes. And you said you're interested in the lock first team snaps this summer. I'll be interested to see how they operate there as well. The Giants have done a lot of kind of trying to shut the door on any more lock first team talk, going back to the end of the spring program and mandatory minicamp, with Daboll and Locke both talking about how, listen, we all know the drill. Daniel Jones is the starter here. Drew's the backup. That's the way it's going to be. And they have said that. That's what they've said to us directly, leading into camp here. So with Daniel Jones healthy and under center and in training camp, it'll be interesting to see. To be honest, Ryan, we could see a version of this where they blame it on, let's say Daniel Jones is the first team quarterback, but let's say they ramp up the number of snaps he takes per game or per practice. So it could be a situation where they call it a load management evaluation of Jones, and then Locke therefore gets some first team reps. Or they might try to steer clear of any first team reps at all for Locke because they know what controversy it'll create. So I'm interested in that as well, how they're going to manage it, because we all know that going back to the spring, Drew Lock decided to come across the country for this job. And was he coming across the country to be a clear and unavoidable backup? And also, as I was interested in throughout the spring and entering training camp here now, it's not normal to see one quarterback taking all the spring reps and then another quarterback taking all the summer reps. Of course, you had that, Atlanta with Michael Penix Jr. getting a lot of reps with Kirk Cousins there as well. They created that own mess for themselves. But I agree. Very interesting part of the Giants offseason and of their early part of training camp coming is the quarterback situation. Like I said, the Giants have tried to take the drama out of that, kind of the air out of that balloon. But it would only take one, curious decision or eyebrow raising comment or, ample Drew Lock snaps in one practice with the first team offense, to kick it back into gear for sure. Ryan, thank you so much for supporting us and for supporting me as always here on Talkin' Ball Live. Really can't thank you enough. All right, let's get back in the queue. Let's see. Juicy Juice. Wow, Juicy Juice. Loved Juicy Juice back in the day. That was the go-to. Juicy Juice says, love your thorough analysis and in-depth answers to all the questions, as well as the tangents that come off of it. Please host a live session after episode 3. Juicy Juice, you guys have convinced me, man. Tuesday night, 10 o'clock, right after watching Hard Knocks episode 3, we will be here talking ball live. Let's go. All right. Christian says they have done little with the interior D line from draft picks to free agency. They must be banking on Sexy Dexy doing his thing, or one of the later round picks from the last 2 years is looking good. I think sometimes too, it's just about, hey, we've made some investments in these resources, and now we're going to, count on our coaches to get something out of these guys, whether it's a free agent signing like Nacho, or some of these draft picks and investments, like you said. And so those things fall on Andre Patterson, the defensive line coach, returning despite the turnover at defensive coordinator. So there is a personnel element to this, but there's also a coach for all of these positions, right? You have Dre Patterson, you have Brian Cox, the assistant D-line coach. These guys are getting paid too. So if you don't make those investments, you could make an easy argument that maybe they were negligent in not doing it. But the other part of it is the coaches have to help these players play and fill those spots as well. So Patterson and Cox under the microscope when it comes to how the D-line evolves and how those young players grow. Aliens AI Future says Barkley deserved more respect. Giants bar and was damaged by that Bush League move. Giants brand, I think is what you mean. Yeah, brand was damaged. Gotcha. Aliens, what was interesting to me, and I didn't mention this earlier when you guys asked about, my review of Hard Knocks. I was interested in where was the conversation about the fact that not only was Barkley the face of their franchise, he was the leader of like a sinking ship last year. And Barkley, the way I was there when it was happening and I was impressed by it and talking about it then. But even in hindsight, the way that Saquon decided that even though he knew it could be the end of New York, the way he handled last season and continued to speak well about the team and their chances and the organization and the program. And yes, of course, he took some liberties that he had in the past, and he certainly spoke from the team standpoint, probably out of turn as far as his priorities, or saying things that they would have rather were not aired out. But Saquon did a lot for them last year to keep things from going off the rails. Like he could have easily, Brian Daboll kept his job because he spends a lot of time on the player relationships, making sure that he's catering to them, even to a fault with, in my opinion, like the fact that from the training staff on down, like the way that they give guys off days whenever they need them, too often. I think the team wasn't prepared at the beginning of last season, but being close with the players and paying close attention to them as individuals, I think in the long run, when everything else was caving in, there just weren't players who were bucking directly at Daboll, saying not only do I hate everything else, but also the head coach is an asshole, right? They weren't saying that. They didn't feel that about Daboll. They still felt like he was the guy who got them to the playoffs the year before. And, not only possibly still had some of that juice, but also he wasn't giving them an overt reason directly to their faces in their personal dealings to give up on him, right? But Saquon Barkley knew what was going on, from his usage to the way that they were handling his contract to the way that he saw where it was headed next come this offseason. He could have easily poisoned the well and turned parts of the locker room against the head coach or against the organization, and probably could have resulted in a coach like Brian Daboll getting fired or bigger changes even happening. And Saquon didn't go that route. And certainly he played it in a savvy, smart way from, and there's ego involved in this as well, trying to make sure that people view you as, he was a leader, but also that teams that are looking to sign you next year view you as a good teammate and not a guy who's going to bring the house down if things don't go his way, right? Even if you're right about it. So that's calculated on Barkley's part. But I was just fascinated that there wasn't conversation about that we saw. I'm sure those talks happened, obviously, and we're not seeing everything on Hard Knocks. I just would have thought, part of that. Now the series isn't over yet, But I would think that I would expect, and I would like to see a scene or an interaction where it is acknowledged that this player was a key part of keeping a lid on things to an extent last year, and that he really had the ability in the palms of his hands to make it all crumble if he really wanted to, and he didn't. Yeah, I just don't know if he got any real credit there with the general manager. Feels like the general manager was clinging more to the comments Barkley had made the summer before, maybe, and not viewing kind of how he had conducted himself, this past season. Daydon says, how strong are the rumors that the Giants may bring back Adoree to strengthen the defensive back room? I haven't heard anything directly that Adoree's coming back, but like I said, you could throw him into a group of a lot of veterans around the league who it would just make more sense at this part of their careers that if they are, let's say, either re-signing or signing elsewhere, that they would just wait and not endure whether it's a full spring or whether it's the early part of training camp. I do know that there were high-ranking people in the Giants building, though, who were not enamored with Adoree's play last season. And so I did not expect him to be back. And at this point, I don't expect him to be back, but the Giants do have a need and they don't have unlimited money at the corner position. And he was a captain last year. So something to consider, but how do I put this? I'm not sure Adoree Jackson at this point in his career is a guy who is going to elevate that secondary to another stratosphere as much as try to create a higher floor, if that makes sense. I like dealing with Adoree, though, and I wish him the best. I'm going to miss him in the locker room if he is, in fact, not here. Let's see. A-Train says, what do you think about Pro Football Focus ranking of Daniel Jones as a sleeper QB this season? Yeah, interesting. A-Train, I think that's probably a kind of a market inefficiency there, like an opportunity to capitalize on like expectations just have never been lower really for the Giants, for where they're coming out of, for Daniel Jones coming off an injury, for them being one of the worst offenses in the league. I mean, there were times where not only could they not protect the quarterback, I mean, they couldn't score points. They couldn't get passes off. They looked like a team that was non-competitive at times, especially offensively, primarily offensively. So I think adding Nabers and also them trying to put it on Jones's shoulders and make it a more pass-centric, quarterback-centric offense and taking that Saquon Barkley threat away and not leaning on the running game. I think all of that just points to, higher volume opportunities for Daniel Jones. And of course, we know that a part of his game is him running the football as well as throwing the football. So just a lot of touches could mean, if he stays healthy and if the line improves, could mean a lot of stats. Doesn't necessarily mean he's going to, that they're going to score a ton of points, have a lot of touchdowns, going to lead to a lot of wins. But, the fact that the discourse in the NFL now is that he's not a $40 million quarterback, even though that is what he is by his contract, what the Giants paid him, $40 million a year. And the discourse is that he's not that player, that the Giants made a mistake. And of course, we know that the Giants themselves were eyeing, replacing him, getting his successor in the building if they could. If not replacing him right away, depending on what was available, looking at all options at the quarterback position. You had the injuries, not just the ACL, but also the 2 neck injuries to think about. So I just think there's A-Train, a lot of reasons, well-documented and now nationally discussed reasons why Daniel Jones has been written off. And it's, so much of it is valid, obviously. So I think sleeper is actually an appropriate, like if you believe in his talent and ability as an individual player, which he's shown in flashes, you can honestly and accurately call him a sleeper because his stock is so low across the board in so many areas based on where the conversation has gone with him. That makes sense. Hunter says, what's your ideal situation for Isaiah Simmons this year with us, the Giants? So I talked to Isaiah late in the year, knowing that he might be back, might not, right? Could depend on who's going to be the defensive coordinator. Could depend on a lot of things. But I did know that, prior to being a Giant, all the conversation about Simmons was about his fit, where he was playing, where he wanted to play, the fact that he was an elite athlete, but not with a real position, disappointment based on where he was drafted versus his production so far. But there was this kind of amorphous idea, like maybe someone could get something out of him, right? I thought he entered the perfect defense with the perfect mind with Martindale. And I thought what you saw from Simmons last year, now, again, I know it's a small sample size, it's 1 year, but I felt like the way that Martindale used him selectively and specifically for certain roles, it was appropriate. It was, to me, maybe the best version of Simmons we will see. And what I mean by that is, you don't necessarily need to take a player like that who's a Swiss Army knife, and after he shows some promise in some of these areas, force him into one of those roles more permanently and try to augment that. Maybe what he is what he was in Martindale's system last year, which was somebody who you take him out to the practice field, and when you're installing a game plan, let's say for the Dallas Cowboys that week, as you're going through it and as you're deploying him in certain areas, you realize he's going to be ideal for, I don't know, like let's say last year it was maybe defending Tony Pollard on passing downs out of the backfield on third downs, right? Or it was blitzing in certain situations, unleashing him as a blitzer, something he does very well, right? Lining him up at linebacker on a certain play, and then lining him up at safety on another play, highlighting his strengths, concealing his weaknesses in certain areas, trying to use what he does best for him and prevent the defense from using his weaknesses against him because he's unique. He's not just a linebacker. There's things he does well at linebacker, things he doesn't. There's things safety he does well, things he doesn't. And I talked to Simmons about this, and he loved playing for Martindale, and he was extremely grateful for the way that this was what Simmons said. And I have to go back and find these quotes exactly. I think I wrote a story about it in the Daily News. I have to double check. I know I took notes when I talked to him about it, so I have to go dig those up. But one thing Simmons said was he really appreciated how much dialogue he had with Martindale about where he was going to play, right? So if Simmons felt like he could help them in a certain area, he would tell Martindale, I think I can help us in this game plan here. And then they would talk about it. They would figure it out, right? And I know early on, Simmons was barking about like he deserved to be on the field more. He wanted more opportunities. And, it seemed like when he had that pick 6 in Washington, he and a lot of guys were saying like, finally he's playing more, right? So there was definitely an effort early on, kind of a battle between, like a complicated system where you're trying to make sure the player understands everything he's doing it, but also, that he can help you athletically. And so you're trying to gauge when is appropriate to unleash him and how. But it seemed like once they got to the midway point of the season there, Simmons was really excited about how he was being deployed and how he was being used. And, contrary to Arizona, when he was, basically bucking the idea of, being pigeonholed, like, are you trying to play him at deep safety, like things like this that just aren't his skill set. The discussion in Arizona at the end was more like, okay, this isn't working. It's not a fit. There's the history of where he was drafted versus what he is now. And now he feels like he's being misused and it's not going to work. it was very positive last year. So the long answer to your question, Hunter, is my ideal situation for Isaiah Simmons is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, it wasn't perfect last year, but I felt like the way that they used Simmons last year was optimal. Like, blitz him strategically, use him to defend running backs on third downs, right? A guy who is bigger than the guys he's guarding and can run with them, right? In those short area plays where he can kind of take away a part of the field, take away that hot route, that outlet for the quarterback, and also be available in space if he has to make that open field tackle. So I want to see them watch film of last year and use him the way they did last season, instead of trying to force something new on him in a new system, which I think would be a mistake. Mel's is shooting fireworks and looks happy to be here, as am I. Mel's, great to see you. Nicking around says refs are so terrible, they've ruined football. I mean, in general, I'm all for getting on the referees. Tonight, by the way, did any of you hear that national anthem for the home run derby? Holy cow. If you haven't, I'm sure the next time you open Instagram or scroll on TikTok or go on X or whatever, or even on YouTube, like you'll see it. If you didn't see it and hear it, it was really something. I had to rewind and double check who the person was that was singing. Like, I wasn't quite sure. Are they a professional singer? Right? Like, maybe I shouldn't be mocking this or feeling like it's, a poor performance. And then they said the person was a 4-time Grammy nominee. Oh boy. Hey, West, what's good? Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Eric says, if the Giants are going to suck, why pay a non-premium position to suck a little less, is Shane's idea, probably. Yeah, no, it was, well, right. It was a combination of non-premium position and also, as he said, as you heard him say in the Hard Knocks franchise, like, it last year got to him that it was carrying over, like the weight of handling it and dealing with the drama of it and the pushback of it had gotten to him. And it became more than just a roster decision. I do think while the non-premium position nature of running backs and Shane's belief in that is, of course, valid and based in research, I do think, again, like, I think you're right. That was a huge motivation, especially based on what the Giants might be this year. But first of all, Shane and Daboll can't afford for this team to suck this year. Like, they can't afford that. If they do, they're in trouble. Also, letting him go to the Eagles and not realizing he's going to end up getting that kind of money from the Eagles is a clear, like, huge misstep. Like, it wasn't like it wasn't like he just was okay with losing him in this climate. It was also completely misjudging what he was going to command on the open market, and from whom. And then the other point was, just you can't get so zeroed in on the non-premium position thing that you don't contextualize what it means on your roster. Like, that was always my thing with Saquon. When we got into the nitty-gritty of the contract battle with Shane and the Giants, you guys know, like, I like Saquon. I respect his game. I don't think he's like the incredible player that he and others have said that he was consistently. He has ability to be an incredible player and be excellent. And he might take a huge leap behind that Philly offensive line. But I was never the person saying, like, this guy is Christian McCaffrey. But I did say that when it came to deciding whether to pay Saquon or not, the Giants had to decide what he meant to them. It's not about, like, in a vacuum, what's a running back? It's about, what does this player mean to us? Because he was worth more to the Giants than he was worth to some other teams. Like, that was as far as what the Giants need versus what other teams need. He should have been worth more to them than he was in the end, in my opinion. Christian says, to an early point you made, yes, they came into last year unprepared and they look soft. I hope they improve this and start off looking competent and competitive. Yes, was certainly a good sign at times in the spring that Daboll was running so much 11 on 11 this year when we didn't see any of that last year in the spring. But was also discouraging to see a lot of guys on the side come the end of the spring too, nursing injuries. So obviously that's part of what motivates the Giants in previous years to give these guys all these rest days. But Christian, I'll go to my grave believing like if I know that coaches need to listen to players need to listen to their bodies. It's a 17 game season, all of that. You have to be sensitive to it. And I didn't play football. So like I've played, tons of sports. I never played, tackle football. So I know that it's an absolute beating these guys are taking. But now that I've been around the NFL for almost a decade daily, I believe very much in the idea that the only way to truly prepare yourself to play real football is to play real football. And that's from talking to players and coaches and the people who've actually been there between the lines. And that means getting used to the speed of the game, to the physicality of the game, and readying your body and getting your body used to getting up from those hits and taking those hits and delivering those hits. Like it's a very real thing. If you don't practice it, when it's time to do it, you're not going to do it. Molly Mall, my man, what's up? Molly Mall says, I'm starting to hear the media and sources like PFF start to say DJ might have a big year, maybe because they believe in the pieces around him. To be fair, this is the best talent he's ever had. Big year. I mean, a sleeper is one thing, like I said, doing better than the low expectations. Like that's one thing. Having a big year. I think they're trying to do everything they can to make sure he does. But also, again, like making sure he had a big year would have been, let's say, tagging Saquon or signing Saquon and having Nabers rather than doing what they did. To me, it would have been drafting an offensive lineman in addition to attacking them in free agency. I think clearly this is Brian Daboll trying to prove that what Daniel Jones is, but also what he is as an offensive coach with a quarterback-centric offense, right? Try to prove that first year was no fluke, and also that he doesn't have to just be a gimmicky kind of run-based offense with Jones in order to succeed. Listen, I hope Jones has a big year. I hope the Giants offense is exciting. I hope they score points and that we're covering some real winning football and that they're not irrelevant by late October, right? Nabers is exciting. I mean, he's a wide receiver, the kind of wide receiver Daniel Jones has never had. Now, he doesn't have the same running game that he's had. We don't know how much better the offensive line will be. That's a huge unanswered question because fact of the matter is that's going to impact, especially without a back like Barkley, that's going to impact the way that they can try to take some pressure off him with a running game without a player like Barkley. And also Daniel Jones needs that time. He's going to need that time to operate. If he gets a lot of time in the pocket, a guy like Nabers is going to get open. Like that's the thing, right? Their schedule is also very tough. So listen, I hope Daniel exceeds expectations and has a big year. But I don't know where all that's coming from. I think it's probably about, like I said, because usually like Daniel Jones is not an inoperable starting quarterback, right? Like I've said this before. I could very easily see him, just like we always talk about the Ryan Tannehill comp that he got coming out of college, which I still think was a great one. Like I could very easily see Daniel having another rough year in New York and then ending up on some other team next year and having his best year, right? Like he's a guy who can play really good football. He's a guy who I can promise you is extremely excited to play with a guy like Malik Nabers. And he's going to put everything into it. So I hope these people are right. Brian Daboll needs to get his ego in check, says Mel's. QB questions he had for the draftees showed a lot. He likes to prove people wrong. That is a short lifeline in New York. Mel's very perceptive. Yes, that's again, it comes back to both the GM and the coach. It's like, it's not personal, right? It it reflects insecurity is what it reflects, right? It reflects insecurity, and you need to have security and be secure and be confident and not be looking over your shoulder and listening and reading everything, listening to and reading everything, especially in this kind of market. The Crunch Bunch says, what's more likely at CB2 to start the year, a veteran free agent or Flott? I personally think a veteran free agent, and then Flott being the slot guy as Phillips continues to develop and work in and push. And, I hope for Nick McLeod's sake, he ends up getting on the field more and factoring in there. Like I mentioned, Darnay Holmes still battling. To me, if the Giants are assembling the best version of themselves, it's Flott in the slot and a veteran on the outside. Molly Mall says, we also know that they inquired about moving back in the draft, and we know Shane and Daboll believe in Daniel Jones. That's why they're putting talent around him. Well, now that he's their guy, once he became their guy, that's what they're doing, right? So they were juggling a couple things this year, right? Because this is what happens when you hit a roadblock in a program, right? You end up doing both. You end up building for the future and also trying to win now. So Daniel Jones deserves a better chance, but also they were trying to insulate themselves at the quarterback position, knowing that he may not be the guy. There have been signs to them that he isn't the guy, and they did sign him to that contract, and that's on them as well. So kind of doing a little bit of both there, managing both fronts. Managing both fronts. Let's see. Hunter, I'm not sure what you were talking about there, but that's funny. Molly Mall says, Year of the Crow. Remember this phrase. Okay, context. Timothy says, should the Giants sign Howard to pair with Banks? That's one free agent out there on the market, working the phones right now. I know I see a question here from Giants Topic as well. Says, hey, Pat, saw an article recently where the Giants may be interested in Marshawn Lattimore, who is a potential cap casualty. Do you think it's possible, or do they go with their guys? Giant Topic, I'm sorry that at the moment I don't have more specific information about. Oh, Hunter's talking about the national anthem, cutting my ears off. Yeah. Topic. I was saying that at the moment, I do not have specific information on these players. I've been trying. This is the time when the agents and these players, a lot of them are, if they're free agents at the moment, they're still enjoying the rest of their summer, and their agents may be fielding a call here and there, or getting feelers from certain teams and telling them, like, we'll let you know, keep us in mind, those kinds of things. But we're probably, entering next week and going into late July, early August. That's when you get in the thick of players looking for spots, trying to jump into camp, or maybe miss the early parts of camp and hit the ground running if they're in shape. But all of these names are names that I'm digging on, because to me, this is where the Giants have to train their attention, and they have to be in this market. I say this all the time. I'll say it again. I do wonder whether the Giants are a team that will be able to attract one of these players, like a bigger name, a guy who is a clear upgrade, a guy who's in a position where he's looking for a team that's going to win. Because, first of all, the Giants don't have unlimited money. They're not at the top of the salary cap structure, or, salary cap space in the league. So there's a lot of teams with more money than they have. And then also you have to, if you're going to bring in a player with pedigree who's looking to win, at the moment, even if the Giants feel like they're building something and that they're better than the outsiders or people like me think they're going to be, it's still a challenge. Let's say in your division in the NFC East, if you were a corner and the Eagles, Cowboys, and Giants called you to play for them for around the same money, would you go to the Giants, right? Let's say they were all offering you a starting spot. Would you go to the Giants? And that's just an example, but that's something to consider. You could argue, though, that based on the Giants roster construction, that there would be more opportunity. Like you would, if you're the Giants and you're going to get that player, you're basically handing that player the keys to CB2, right? They definitely need a player at that position. Big Dash, what's going on? Welcome. Good to see you again. Hope all is well. Molly Mall means people will eat crow on the Giants. All right. Hey, man, I hope so. You guys may or may not remember this, but a couple of years ago, during their first season, I think I predicted them to win like 4 or 5 games or something, and they went 9-7-1 and made the playoffs. So I did a video on social media with myself in a clown face, and I owned up to it. So if that happens again, I'll do it again. I picked them to win 4 games this year in the spring. I'll have a final prediction by the time we get through training camp. Probably not going to change that. I feel pretty good about that one, but we'll see where it goes. Hopefully, obviously, I'm wrong. Hunter says, I would like to give Singletary a fair chance. I think he's got a good skill set to at least make us competent. He's had 3 straight 800-yard seasons. Oh, Singletary's a good player. He's a good player. But, I do think like the last time Singletary was a primary back in a Brian Daboll offense, Daboll never ran the ball, right? If you remember back in Buffalo with Josh Allen, those were the teams that Daboll was, yes, his offense started, incrementally improving and, growing towards like some of the tops in the league. But he was also notorious for never running it. So Singletary, obviously here because he's well-rounded, he can help in the passing game. And those types of things, but a good complement back, ideally not like a lead bell cow. Obviously there's other players in there, so they're going to try to do it by committee. Giant Topic says, gotcha. I definitely understand. And honestly, that's a fair answer on corners. Appreciate answering my question. You got it. Topic. Giant Topic also says, what would be enough stat line in 2024 for the Giants to keep Jones for another year, or God forbid, even extend him to avoid that cap hit? Extend him. Oh boy, that would be quite a turn of events, huh? Well, Topic, for them to consider, like you just said about if he played so well, you're actually talking about extending him to lower his cap hit. That would mean being healthy all year. Okay. That would mean not getting injured, like not having an injury that caused him to miss a game. And I come back to forget any other stats. The stat I always come back to is touchdowns. Like Daniel Jones, I'm calling it up right now because I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head. And listen, this is a Giants offense problem as well as a Daniel Jones problem. So not sitting here criticizing just Daniel here. But Daniel Jones right now, he threw 24 touchdown passes as a rookie under Pat Shurmur, okay? His next 4 seasons, okay? 11 touchdown passes in 14 games, 10 touchdown passes in 11 games, 15 touchdown passes in 16 games, and 2 touchdown passes in 6 games. So, Topic, it starts and ends, in my opinion, with getting in the damn end zone. Like, it was funny. Like I told you, I'm having Jeremy Fowler on the podcast this week from ESPN. Jeremy's great. He's been doing a series of, like top 10 rankings at every position, talking to executives and coaches and people around the league. It's really thorough. It's really good. You guys should check it out on ESPN.com. And, I believe it was Jared Goff he was ranked higher than I expected. And one thing that it stood out to me was that I believe it said that he was the best red zone quarterback in the league last year. Like I think he maybe didn't throw an interception in the red zone. And just tons of touchdowns, like converted into 6 points or 7 points instead of 3 consistently. And that's really where Jones, in addition to the injuries, obviously, which of course is impacted by the offensive line, things like that, it just comes down to scoring touchdowns. He needs to get in the end zone. And yes, there were, I read the passing touchdown numbers there. Obviously, he scored with his legs, especially in the first season of the Daboll regime when they went to the playoffs. That was a key part of it. So those count as well, right? Those count. But the bottom line is, I've always felt this way about Daniel. And I don't hate his game, but I'm not a guy who thinks that he's definitely the $40 million guy either. He's a guy who can move you between the 20s, but when this field shrinks and you get down into those faster decisions in the red zone, it doesn't always go the way you want. In fact, there are times where you're holding your breath, hoping it doesn't go the way you think it might. And that's what needs to change. Brian Daboll as a play caller is a part of that. The offensive line is a part of that. The skill position group's a part of that, but that's also on the quarterback. And that topic, like what would get him in the Giants, in the conversation of the Giants saying, hell yeah, he's the guy. We knew it all along. He's worth it. Here he is to stay. If you give me 30 touchdown passes and play 17 games and get in the playoffs, you're in the conversation you're talking about in hypothetically. Crunch Bunch says, any validity to Joe Schoen wanting a new QB and Daboll preferring to stick with Daniel Jones? Daboll's infatuation with getting Nabers and his reported love for Daniel Jones since watching his tape in college. No, that doesn't add up to me about Daboll loving Daniel Jones this offseason and convincing Joe Schoen or arguing with Joe Schoen against quarterbacks. My understanding was the Giants, loved Drake May and they just couldn't get him. Really, this has been a deal where the Giants, outside of signing Daniel Jones to that contract, this Giants regime has been a position where it was like initially they expected this to be a one and done with a quarterback, and then they made it work. And then last year they tried to open it up after paying him and it fell flat on its face. And it kind of confirmed a lot of their beliefs in some of the shortcomings of the quarterback and what this looked like, especially when you consider Crunch Bunch. This is NFL GMs and coaches. They want to draft and select and work with their own guy. And so this has extended their work with someone else's draft pick. Now, there's a lot to like about Daniel Jones. There's a lot, that Daniel can offer. But no, there was a high amount of doubt about Daniel Jones this offseason. Now, there is obviously, as Joe Schoen said in Hard Knocks, the acknowledgement that he didn't have much of a chance. Of course, that's on the coach and the general manager and their ability to operate an offense and build a roster around him, of course. But yeah, no, what you just described in that question to me sounds like revisionist history coming from somewhere. Giant Topic says, I can't argue that, Pat. I would love for Daniel to cross 30 passing TD finally and stay healthy for all 17. Enough is enough. Something tells me this team is waiting on Arch. That's funny to say, and it could end up being true that, that's what they're counting on down the road if it comes to that. But I promise you this, Giant Topic, like there's a lot of people whose jobs are on the line prior to Arch Manning coming out of college, right? Who won't be here when Arch Manning comes out of college if they don't win games and they don't prove to Giants ownership that this is a competent operation and program and offense and that they have the ability to continue building this in the right direction. Like, let's just face it, being a team with a 6.5 win over under in year 3, looking like more like a roster of a first year program that's just starting out, but you're 3 drafts in, 24 draft picks, 3rd year for the head coach, 10 major staff changes from last year, resignations, voluntary departures, the head coach taking over play calling, 2 coordinators gone. The only coordinator who remains has gotten play calling taken away from him. The stakes are high for this regime. So, maybe, I'm sure they got Arch Manning in the scouting book, but that's not how this works. Like these guys, even if Joe Schoen, for example, says like people have to be patient, you want instant gratification, it doesn't happen that quick. Even if he tries to profess that, they know that this is not about waiting for 3 years or 2 years. You don't have tomorrow. You have today, and you have to make it work, or you don't get to tomorrow in this league. So I think I mentioned it in the Daily News today, but the Giants were one of only 3 teams in the top 8 or 9. I think it was 5 teams in the top 8 fired their coaches and 3 retained them. So the Giants at Daboll, the Bears with Eberflus, and then Arizona with Gannon. But, he's only going into his second year. So, it happens. Guys lose their job after their first year. That is, kind of counts. But then the other 5 all got rid of their head coaches. So that's where the Giants are. They got to get out of that group or else they won't get to Arch. Topic says, I feel the same way, Pat. They won't be here for Arch. Can't prolong this. I'd love for them to get Shador, and I think Daboll could do wonders with him, but I doubt they even take a chance on him. Yeah, all the discourse coming from Shador's side and, how that's going to go. The drama is only going to ramp up from there. I will say this, though. Joe Schoen has now proven with the Thibodeau pick and with the Nabers pick. Now, different situations, obviously. I'm not demonizing these guys, but there are questions about Kayvon's commitment level coming out of college, right? Is he more focused on the business end than the playing end? Obviously, the off-field questions and the attitude questions about a guy like Nabers. And, Joe Schoen has shown that he will pick the talent, and those things will not prevent him from doing that. So a Shador Sanders, who maybe would have been a guy less likely for the Giants to select in years past, if Joe Schoen's a general manager, let's say Shador is saying he won't play for the Giants, or Deion Sanders is saying that, or Deion's creating a stir, trying to force him somewhere else, or taking pot shots at the Giants or whatever. Like, I could see Joe Schoen still drafting that player compared to maybe someone in the past, or the Giants in the past, just writing off and saying, like, we don't want any part of this, right? Schoen clearly feels, let's try to get the high-end talent when we can, and we'll look into the other stuff, but the talent is going to reign the day. And there's something to be said for that. We'll see if it pays off for him down the road. Crunch Bunch says, sucks to see the Giants invest in Jones with a $40 million contract and immediately sour on him after playing just 5 games last season. Yeah, there's definitely a part of them, of course, that understands that he didn't really have a shot last year. There's also a part of them that doesn't appear to know necessarily what giving him a shot means, if they're writing off Saquon based on like how the negotiations felt, and on kind of mismanagement or a lack of idea of how the market's going to go, so that he doesn't have like a really good, impressive, imposing running game and a number 1 wide receiver, right? Like, are you helping the quarterback there, or are you really adding talent, but also not fully deploying this quarterback this year by arming him with both Barkley and Nabers, right? But so there's an element of the Giants that definitely, they understand that he didn't have a chance last year, but they also, as Shane said, they need to protect themselves, and this is the number 1 thing that people need to understand that I feel like most people don't, is that the Giants this spring scouted quarterbacks like they don't usually do. Like, they don't do what they did this year, the way they scouted the quarterbacks every year. That is not true. Like, when you hear Daboll, you hear somebody else say, we look at the quarterbacks every year. No, they don't. Not like that. Like, yes, they look at players, but not the way that they scour the earth for a quarterback this year and tried to trade up to 3. They do not do that every year. Crunch Bunch says the Schoen and Daboll came in at the worst possible time. Their first draft, the best quarterback was Sam Howell. The second draft, their pick was too low to pick a QB. This year felt like a reach to take one. Yep. All starts with them winning in year 1 against an easier schedule. Giant Topic says, how's the feel around Carmen Brasillo? He seemed to gel well with Daboll and Shane on Hard Knocks, but is it fair to say there's unfair expectations for him in 2024? With him and James Ferentz here as assistant O-line coach, and then with Chris Snee here working the scouting end, I think the arrow everyone is hoping is pointing up. I think Brasillo is probably facing unfair pressure in the sense that, he's the 8th offensive line coach the Giants have had in the last decade. Like, in 10 years, 8 O-line coaches. And I think it's safe to say at this point, it's not the O-line coaches, or at least it's not only the O-line coaches, right? People are culpable if they're involved in these operations every day, for sure. But the Giants, if they're turning over their offensive line coaching position that often, there's obviously more at play when it comes to the personnel, the makeup of these guys they're taking, their ability to stay healthy, the offensive systems, whether they're helping the O-linemen or hurting them, whatever it is, right? It all goes into the pot. And I do think that, there will be, as there always is, a section of the fan base and probably internally, the idea of pointing the finger at a guy like Brasillo if it doesn't work out, and the expectation that he, not only the free agent adds, but that Brasillo himself will be part of the answer to improving the offensive line. You want that to happen. You need that to happen for the quarterback to improve. Right? You do need the O-line to improve, and you need Brasillo to be a part of that. But it's not all on him, right? Evan Neal was selected 7th overall by Joe Schoen. If he doesn't play well at right tackle, that's not a Brasillo problem. That's also a general manager problem, as it has been so far, right? It's just one example. Welvin says, what's your take on keeping Neal at right tackle, moving Runyon and Jermaine out of position? I think that the injury and the misdiagnosis for Evan Neal at the end of last year, he ends up in a position where the Giants he does deserve the ability to try to protect that position. I do think the Giants are poised to pivot if they need to because of the skill set of Illuminor and Runyon Jr. And then they have Aaron Stinney as well, guard, who could pop in if they have to move guys around and take Neal out, those kind of things. But as we talked about after the spring, they really went wire to wire in the spring with Illuminor at left guard and Runyon at right guard, looking like this is the actual plan. And Illuminor at least articulated that he's not going to be cross-training at tackle and guard. He's going to plan on being a guard. And so that was interesting to hear because it sounds like they're putting all their eggs in that basket as far as Evan Neal at right tackle goes to start out with. And it's a risk, but it's the calculated risk based on their initial evaluation, on Joe Schoen's evaluation of him coming out in the draft. And I think another example of the GM feeling confident, right? Even maybe even to the point of arrogance at times, but these are positions that these guys got there for a reason because they believe in their conviction. They have conviction about their decisions, and they always go back to, like, I'll never forget hearing Shane say after the season, he was like referencing basically like defending the Neal pick 2 years ago based on how he went back and rewatched the Alabama college tape and said, I would make the decision again, right? Ignoring the way that maybe like the players' makeup and ability to handle the market, not to mention not just his coaching, but also their inability to really catch guys and the team when they're faltering and drowning, especially last year. Like, all that goes into the pot as well, and that's part of the evaluation. Michael says, I'm more concerned about the Eagles than the Giants, who pummeled them to close out the season. Improvements to the O-line, D-line, wide receiver, deeper backfield, more stable D. Giants were 3 plays from 9 wins. Yeah, Michael, that's an optimistic view of it. I agree with you about the Eagles in the sense that, like, assuming that they're going to be the team they were 2 years ago is dangerous and flawed thinking. Like, they're going to be a new version of the Eagles. And if they're not approaching this season knowing that they were arguably the worst team in football for a stretch at the end of the season, like based on how they were just operating and falling off a cliff, playing, and, their lack of leadership, their lack of apparent locker room chemistry, everything that went into it, they were a disaster. And just like Daboll was being called on the carpet, Sirianni's being called on the carpet. And I agree with you that, you look at Philly, you look at the Eagles, like, yes, they have a lot of talent, but you can't assume they're just going to be good again. Like, they need to re-earn that. And losing Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox, no guarantee losing 2 of your better players at key positions that you're going to be able to do that. Now, you're right. The Giants were 3 plays away from 9 wins. They also gave away those 3 games because their head coach didn't know how to manage the games. And that's their same head coach who is now going to be on the headset calling offensive plays while also doing that. Um, and the fact of the matter is, like, it was almost like the Giants' good fortune of the previous year regressed back to reality. And you and I both know that those games can go either way year to year. They tend to. Uh, but definitely, um, definitely, I believe, Michael, that um, the Giants are a team that, even though they were close to the 9 wins that you're describing, they were in such disrepair as far as how they were operating on game day and how the coach was running things. How the GM was on the headset monitoring the situation for 4 straight weeks, as I reported. Like, it really got bad. And so, um, 6 wins in a sense, obviously, to your point, was 3 wins fewer than it easily could have been if they had managed a few games properly. But based on their dysfunction internally and how bad it got, 6, frankly, to me, felt high based on what the floor could have been if they didn't catch some lightning in a bottle on an easier schedule when DeVito was in there and the defense was just forcing takeaways after takeaways. Crunch Bunch says, speaking of offensive line, what's the sense around the building about Evan Neal? Feels like he'll inevitably get benched for Jermaine. Crunch Bunch, I think I described in the spring, it was very odd going deep into the spring how removed it felt like Evan Neal was from the rest of the group. Um, I think definitely last year, the off the field stuff with the fans, not just the play, but that stuff, everything snowballed into a worst case scenario that got even worse when he was out there rehabbing what he was told was an ankle sprain and turned out to be a fracture that he needed surgery on. And then that, lengthens his recovery time. And now brings us to where we are now. So, I think the signs are there that it's not going the way that the Giants ideally would need it to. And so I agree with you that it's here's what I think, as far as Illuminor and benching Neal. I think that they need to give Neal, they know they need to give Neal, and they want to give Neal that first crack at it. But I can't stress this enough. How they start is extremely important. And the leash on, players on the fence, right? It needs to be fast. It needs to be quick. And it's going to be, in my opinion. Like, you can't, let's say you're not in the year where you can ride out a bad tackle for 4 weeks to see if he's going to steady. And then you start 1-3 and then you make the switch, right? And it's too late. Like, the Giants aren't in that position. And like I've said before, when we've talked about the quarterback position in that regard, people have said, well, do you think is going to have a short leash on the quarterback, like with Drew Lock, Daniel Jones? And to me, you either make Daniel Jones your starter and you give him room to succeed or fail, or you don't believe in him and you think Lock's better and you make Lock the starter. But if they do, you can't do something where, like, you start Daniel Jones week 1, he struggles in week 1, and you start Lock week 2. Like, that just means that you had no confidence in who you picked in the first place. Crunch Bunch says, I'm not sure if they have a lot of confidence in JMS considering what they were expecting from him at age 25. Crunch Bunch, they still like JMS, but they did add a couple centers. And I think what you're hinting on, which is true, is that, like, everybody knows Evan Neal needs to improve. He's a popular talking point. Everyone's familiar with him. Even people who don't even know the Giants know that Evan Neal is a top 10 pick who struggles at right tackle for them, right? JMS and his need to improve and get better is something internally the Giants are well aware of needs to happen. JMS knows needs to happen. He said it publicly, and is quietly one that I'm glad you're watching, and you obviously know what you're watching. And that's one to watch for sure, because he does need to take a step forward based on what their expectations were drafting him. Todd Banks says, when I see Jordan Addison arrested this week and Nabers making it rain, I wonder if passing on Rome Odunze might end up being another regrettable decision by Joe. Yeah, and Todd, I agree. Like, just in general, like Rome Odunze, he came off in that episode the way that people said he was: clean cut, well-rounded, impressive. Sounds like a guy you want in your program, on your team. He's going to be a leader. He's going to be talented, right? And you could see that, Schoen and the Giants were like all over scouting him at the combine too. Like, he was, what did he said to Ryan Cowden? I think it was like, basically, if I forget to watch something Odunze does, like, can you tell me to pick my head up so I see it? But yeah, that's what I say is they put it all in the pot. But I do think Joe Schoen, even the way he attacks, like free agency with Brian Burns this year, like clearly he's trying to add supreme talents. And listen, we're all trying to do that. If you're a general manager, or you're looking to improve a roster, that's what you want to do. But I feel like in that sense, I'll be interested to see if we get more insight into it. But you have to think in the long run, even though they knew what Rome Odunze was in those off-field areas and how encouraging that was, they were willing to live with the uncertainty or the bumps of Nabers because they felt like he was the superior talent. And that's Shane's call. And so that's how he's running the program. We'll see if it was the right decision. Bill Hartnett says Sirianni collapsed after Big Dom was banned from the field. Any truth to that? Definitely seemed to coincide, Bill. I think there was definitely more to it, as far as how the defense was being managed, his decisions to shake up the coaching staff, and then tapping Matt Patricia with the defense, and then the players not responding to that. Definitely seemed like he lost his way as a leader and as somebody who had an ability to have a finger on the pulse of the locker room, because it wasn't just like they were struggling on the field X's and O's wise. They looked like a team that was not together by the end. Several of their key players looked like they were going through the motions, AJ Brown, Jalen Hurts, almost the entire defense at times. So I think it was more than just like Big Dom not being on the sideline. But certainly Sirianni gets hot on the sideline too. His temper flares. And so, when things go poorly and you're losing your cool and the players aren't showing any poise to begin with, that can be a bad recipe for sure. Michael says, thanks. Hope all is well. Same to you, Michael. Michael says, by the way, what the heck happened at the end of the Jets game? Anything from the inside? Yeah. I mean, it was, the wrong decision. I first guessed it. I second guessed it. I third guessed it. Like, they knew Graham Gano was hurt and that he had actually missed a similar kick earlier in the game. And he sent him out to kick a field goal where 1 yard from Saquon Barkley would have ended the game for the Giants. And then, mistakes, on by the defense, whether it was on the pass rush end or in the secondary. But primarily what happened was, I guess the point is, it was a full team meltdown at the end. The coaching, offense, defense, special teams, et cetera. But it started with the head coach in the moment making an unsound decision, not considering all the factors, not weighing what his team is, what type of game they're in, right? And let's remember too, with Tyrod leaving that game and Tommy DeVito at quarterback, like their offense was non-existent in that game. So, with even semi-competent offensive play, they wouldn't have even been in that spot. So that's, again, offensive head coach, a roster constructed that they can't keep healthy to the point where they're now running an offense that can't throw a forward pass, puts them in a position where it magnifies everything, and that's how you lose, right? So that's, but it was, at the end, it was the coaching decision. It was mismanagement in a critical spot, something that they really struggled with, the ability to to plan for and then take it to game day, and with poise, without panic, and with full context of the game situation and who you're playing and who you are and who you have and who you don't, making the right call. Crunch Bunch says, I think one interesting storyline is Slayton versus Hyatt during training camp. Both serve the same role as deep threats. Can't deploy them both at the same time without taking away Nabers or Wan'Dale. To me, Crunch Bunch, I think, that could easily be a regular 4-man rotation where everybody's playing a lot. Nabers probably doesn't come off the field, but the other guys do here and there, but selectively. So it ends up they're all playing a lot because it is going to be a pass heavy offense. I personally think Wan'Dale is the one who, when we watched in the spring, Nabers, Wan'Dale, Hyatt playing a lot, right? Of course, Slayton wasn't there early on, but to me, Wan'Dale is more of like, he's a gadget player, he's a guy who you can deploy in specific areas, specific situations in the slot, jet sweeps. You could maybe even use him as a running back. We saw him make a couple plays somewhat down the field last year at a big catch on a nice route from Tommy DeVito against Green Bay and that big primetime win at MetLife Stadium. So he can do it, but Slayton's a veteran, has a lot of chemistry with Daniel Jones that does show up to me in some key spots. That's why he's got that streak running of leading the team in receiving yards. And I do think even though the young, exciting talent is a good thing to have on the offense, you do need that veteran, reliable, personality and player, right? So whether it's Hyatt or Robinson, I think that there will be plenty of space for Slayton to be on the field because they're going to need reliability as well as ability. I like that. Crunch Bunch says, tough spot for the Giants investing in Hyatt, who they had a second round grade on, and Slayton with his contract experience. Yeah, well, it's interesting. They are both like guys who can stretch the field, but also Slayton's a more complete route runner versus what Hyatt is at the moment. Hyatt also, though, has that top end speed that most people don't, right? So similar skill sets, but also different players. And like I said, reliability also matters compared to ability. This has been great. It's been great to jump back in the saddle here on Talkin' Ball Live with Pat Leonard. Sounds like there's demand for it. So we're going to do it again tomorrow night, Tuesday, July 16th, 10 p.m. Eastern. We will be here to break down Hard Knocks episode 3. So right after you watch Hard Knocks episode 3, join me here on the YouTube channel, PL on NFL, and we will do another Talkin' Ball Live episode. We'll keep it shorter than this one. We'll tighten it up, but answer all your questions. We'll have plenty to react to as well, obviously, so that'll be a lot of fun. And just remember, again, Boom Chaga, the mushroom super drink. Boom Chaga mushroom super drink. This is our new sponsor. We are thrilled to have them on the Talkin' Ball with Pat Leonard podcast and Talkin' Ball Lives as a sponsor. And we are brought to you by the Boom Chaga mushroom super drink, a natural extract loaded with anti-inflammatory, immune boosting antioxidants and heart healthy compounds. You can easily pour this natural liquid supplement into any of your favorite drinks. I put mine in my coffee every morning and immediately feel the difference. I personally have felt a post-workout like energy boost with Boom. Chaga also has the ability to lower cholesterol, reduce inflammation, and improve immune health and heart health with its beta-glucans and antioxidants. Go to boomchaga.com today to place your first order. And if you use the discount code TalkinBall25 or access it through the QR code on your screen, so you see the code and the QR code right here, you will get 25% off your first subscribe and save order. Right now, that means a month's supply costs you only $30. Comes in this bag right here. Can't recommend it highly enough. Start feeling the difference today at boomchaga.com. Also brought to you by Bet Online and by Estate 98 Coffee and Esencia Day Cafe from El Salvador. Dates back to 1798. Go buy it on TikTok. I believe it's Drink Estate 98 is their handle there. Bill says he got in late, but he'll watch the beginning back in a bit. Thanks for the show, Pat. Thank you all for being here. If you missed it live, we're going live again Tuesday, July 16th, 10 p.m. Eastern, after Hard Knocks episode 3. We're going to react immediately to the newest Hard Knocks episode and talk about what we saw behind the scenes, probably more about quarterback pursuit, Saquon Barkley, Brian Burns. I'm interested to see about what personalities will be highlighted as well. Great to be back doing these Talking Ball Lives. We'll see you on Tuesday, July 16th. Until next time, Pat Leonard from the Daily News signing off. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.